Refugee family asks Elon Musk for help. Next day they found a new home. Amina clutched the worn edges of her scarf, her fingers trembling slightly as she adjusted it over her head. The midday sun beat down on the refugee camp, the air thick with dust and desperation. Around her, hundreds of families, displaced by war, shuffled through the dirt pathways between rows of makeshift tents and crumbling shelters. The smell of smoke and unwashed clothing lingered in the air, a constant reminder of everything they had lost. She pulled her two eldest sons, Yusuf and Omar, closer, while her youngest, Sammy, clung to her leg. His small hands, dirt-streaked and calloused from too many days without proper food, tightened around the fabric of her dress. "Mama, I'm hungry," Sammy whispered, his voice barely audible over the distant sounds of children crying and men shouting orders near the aid station. Amina's heart clenched, but she forced a smile. "I know, Habibi. Just a little longer." It had been weeks since they had arrived in this camp, one of many scattered along the border, housing those who had fled with nothing but the clothes on their backs. Food was rationed, water was scarce, and hope was fading. Every night, she lay awake, staring at the canvas roof of their tent, wondering if there was a future beyond this. But today was different. Today, she had an idea. She had seen it happen before. People with power, people with voices, using social media to reach the world. What if, just what if, someone, somewhere would listen? She didn't have connections. She didn't have resources. But she had her story. Amina had spent the last few days searching for a piece of cardboard, and when she finally found one, discarded behind a supply tent, she clutched it like gold. With a borrowed marker, she wrote the only words she could think of. "Elon Musk, please help." She had heard of him before. The man who built rockets, the man who dreamed of Mars, the man who was rich beyond imagination. A man like that could change everything for a family like hers, if only he knew they existed. Her boys looked at her curiously as she held up the sign. "Mama, what are you doing?" Omar asked, his dark eyes filled with uncertainty. Amina knelt beside them, brushing the dust from their cheeks. "We're asking for a miracle." With the help of a volunteer, a photo was taken, Amina, smiling despite the exhaustion, her sons standing beside her, their young faces filled with both innocence and hardship. The sign stood out against the background of the camp, bold and unmistakable. The volunteer uploaded the picture, tagging every influential person they could think of. And then they waited. At first, nothing happened. Amina carried on as usual, standing in line for food rations, washing clothes in a metal basin, making sure her children were safe. But then, whispers began spreading through the camp. "Amina, have you seen this?" a woman asked, shoving a phone into her hands. The screen displayed the very photo she had taken, now shared thousands, no, tens of thousands of times. Her stomach tightened as she scrolled through the comments. "Hun, you have to see this. This family needs help. If anyone can do it, it's Musk. Humanity still exists. Let's make this happen." Her hands trembled. Could this really be happening? Somewhere, far across the ocean, in a sleek, modern office filled with the hum of technology, Elon Musk scrolled through his feed, his blue eyes scanning through the usual barrage of tweets and memes. But then, something caught his attention. A picture. A mother, a scarf wrapped tightly around her head, standing with 3 young boys. A sign in her hands with his name scrawled across it in desperate, hopeful letters. He paused. For a man who had seen it all, who had launched rockets, revolutionized electric vehicles, and dreamed of colonizing other planets, there was something strikingly human about this. Elon leaned forward, his fingers drumming against his desk. "Find them," he said simply. His team didn't hesitate. Back in the refugee camp, Amina woke to the sound of voices outside her tent. At first, she thought it was another distribution line forming, but then she heard something strange, her name. "Amina, there are people asking for you." She stepped outside, pulling her scarf over her hair, confusion knitting her brows. And then she saw them. 2 men, dressed in clean suits, stood near the entrance of the camp, speaking with local aid workers. They held papers, speaking into earpieces, their eyes scanning the sea of people until they landed on her. One of them, a tall man with dark hair, approached carefully, a kind smile on his face. "Amina?" he asked. She hesitated, pulling her sons close. "Yes," she answered cautiously. "My name is Daniel. I work with the humanitarian outreach team. We're here on behalf of Mr. Musk." Her breath hitched. "Mr. Musk?" The man nodded. "Elon Musk saw your message. He wants to help." A lump formed in Amina's throat. She looked at her children, then back at the man. This had to be a dream. Things like this did not happen to people like her. Daniel continued, his voice gentle. "We want to take you somewhere safe. Somewhere you can start over." Amina swayed slightly, feeling as though the ground beneath her had shifted. She had spent so many years believing that hope was for other people. And yet, here they were, standing in front of her, offering her something she had barely dared to dream of. "Where?" she whispered. Daniel smiled. "America." Amina's breath caught in her throat, the word America hanging in the air like an impossible dream. Her fingers trembled as she clutched the fabric of her dress, her eyes darting between Daniel and her sons, who looked up at her with wide, uncertain eyes. Could this really be happening? Could they really be leaving this place, this endless cycle of waiting, struggling, and surviving? She didn't realize she was shaking until Daniel gently placed a reassuring hand on her arm. "I know this is overwhelming," he said softly. "Take your time. But Elon Musk has offered to sponsor your family's relocation. He wants to ensure you have a safe home, education for your boys, and the resources to rebuild your life." Amina's legs felt weak beneath her, but she forced herself to remain standing. "You mean we can leave?" Her voice wavered, thick with disbelief. "We don't have to stay here?" Daniel nodded. "You'll have to go through some formalities, of course, visas, paperwork, but we have a legal team already working on it. If you agree, we can begin the process immediately." She pressed her fingers to her lips, fighting back the rush of emotion that threatened to overwhelm her. For so long, she had taught herself not to hope, not to dream beyond the borders of this camp. And now, in a single moment, the doors to a new future had been flung open. Yusuf, her eldest, tugged at her sleeve. "Mama, is this real?" His voice was quiet, hesitant, as if speaking the words out loud might shatter the fragile miracle before them. Amina knelt before her sons, cupping their faces in her hands. She saw the hunger in their eyes, the exhaustion, the silent longing for something better. She swallowed hard, then looked up at Daniel, her decision clear. "Yes," she whispered, then stronger, firmer. "We'll go." Daniel smiled warmly. "Then let's get started." The next few days were a blur of movement, paperwork, medical checks, and hushed conversations with aid workers who had long since accepted the grim reality that most families in the camp would never leave. But Amina and her sons were different now. They had been chosen. They had been seen. When the final approvals came through, they were escorted to a waiting vehicle. The camp, the place that had been their home for too long, faded into the distance as they were driven to a nearby airport. Amina barely allowed herself to breathe, afraid that if she did, this dream would dissolve into the dust behind them. When they reached the airport, a private jet awaited them. The boys gasped in awe as they took in the sleek design, the polished steps leading up to the entrance. It was more luxury than they had ever seen in their lives. Daniel chuckled at their amazement. "This is just the beginning," he assured them. As the plane lifted into the sky, Amina pressed her forehead against the window, watching the land below grow smaller and smaller. She exhaled, a single tear slipping down her cheek. They were really leaving. They were really free. The flight was long, but the excitement and nerves kept sleep at bay. When they finally landed, the air was different, clean, crisp, filled with possibilities. The moment they stepped onto American soil, something inside Amina shifted. She wasn't just a refugee anymore. She was a mother standing at the threshold of a new life. A convoy of cars was waiting for them. They were driven through wide streets lined with towering buildings, cars gliding smoothly along the roads. Everything was so clean, so orderly, so far from the chaos they had left behind. Amina held Sammy's small hand tightly as he pressed his face against the window, his little mouth open in wonder. The car pulled into a quiet neighborhood, filled with homes that looked like they belonged in movies. And then it stopped in front of their house. Amina stepped out hesitantly, staring at the home before her. It was beautiful, 2 stories, a small garden in the front, windows that gleamed in the sunlight. It looked too perfect, too much like something out of a dream. She turned to Daniel, her voice barely above a whisper. This is for us?" Daniel nodded. "Courtesy of Mr. Musk. Everything inside is ready for you." Her hands shook as she reached for the doorknob. When she stepped inside, she gasped. The house was fully furnished, a cozy living room with plush sofas, a kitchen stocked with food, bedrooms with soft beds and warm blankets. There were clothes for her sons, toys for Sammy, even books neatly arranged on a shelf. Yusuf and Omar ran through the house, their laughter echoing off the walls. "Mama, there's a room just for us," Omar shouted excitedly. Sammy giggled as he bounced onto the couch, sinking into its softness. Amina stood frozen in the doorway, unable to move, unable to comprehend the kindness that had brought them here. Tears streamed down her face as she whispered to no one in particular, "This can't be real." But it was real. And for the first time in years, she allowed herself to believe in the future. Amina stood in the center of the living room, her hands pressed to her mouth, overwhelmed by the reality of what surrounded her. The scent of fresh furniture filled the air, the cool breeze from the air conditioning brushing against her skin, a stark contrast to the suffocating heat of the refugee camp. She could still hear her son's laughter echoing through the house, the sound so foreign yet so beautiful. She moved cautiously, running her fingers along the smooth edges of the dining table, the soft fabric of the curtains, the glossy surface of the kitchen countertops. Everything felt untouched, waiting for them to claim it as their own. A sob bubbled in her throat, and before she could stop it, tears slipped down her cheeks. Daniel, who had remained respectfully near the doorway, gave her a reassuring nod. "Take your time," he said gently. "This is your home now." Amina turned to face him, wiping her tears quickly, though her hands still trembled. This is too much. I don't even know how to begin to thank Mr. Musk." Daniel smiled. "He doesn't want thanks, Amina. He just wants to make sure you and your boys are safe." She had forgotten what that felt like. No more waking up in the middle of the night at the sound of distant bombs. No more standing in line for hours under the scorching sun just to get a bag of rice. No more fear of what tomorrow might bring. The boys came running back, their faces glowing with joy. "Mama, did you see the beds? They're so soft," Omar exclaimed. Yusuf, usually the quieter of the 3, tugged at her sleeve. "Can we really stay here?" His voice was small, uncertain, as if afraid that at any moment, this would all be taken away. Amina knelt before them, cupping their faces in her hands. "Yes, my loves," she whispered, her voice breaking. "This is our home now." Sammy, too young to fully understand the depth of their journey, simply climbed into her lap, wrapping his tiny arms around her. "Mama, can we have dinner here?" he asked innocently, his big eyes staring up at her. She let out a shaky laugh. "Yes, Habibi. Tonight, we will eat together in our home." Daniel gestured toward the kitchen. "Everything is stocked. Cook whatever you'd like. There's also some fresh clothes for you and the boys upstairs." Amina exhaled, nodding in gratitude. "I don't know how to ever repay this kindness." "You don't have to," Daniel said simply. "Just live. Build your life. That's all that matters." As he left, closing the door gently behind him, Amina stood still for a moment, absorbing everything. Then she took a deep breath and turned toward the kitchen. Cooking had always been her way of grounding herself, of creating something good even in the worst of times. She opened the cabinets, marveling at the rows of spices, the neatly arranged grains, the fresh vegetables in the refrigerator. For the first time in years, she would cook not out of survival, but out of love. She washed the rice, chopped the onions, the familiar rhythm of the motions bringing her comfort. The boys set the table, their excitement infectious. By the time she placed the steaming plates in front of them, she could hardly believe this was real. They sat together, the 4 of them, in a warm, well-lit dining room, eating a meal that hadn't been rationed or handed to them in a plastic bag. The boys laughed between bites, and Amina just sat there, watching them, memorizing this moment. After dinner, she helped them settle into their new beds. Sammy clutched a soft toy he had found in the room, curling up under the covers with a sleepy smile. Omar and Yusuf whispered excitedly about their new school, which Daniel had mentioned they would be starting soon. As Amina tucked them in, she whispered a silent prayer, one of gratitude, one of hope. That night, as she lay in her own bed, a real bed, with soft sheets and a thick blanket, she stared up at the ceiling, unable to sleep. The events of the past few weeks played in her mind like a film. The camp, the sign, the moment they found out Elon Musk had seen them. And now this. She reached for her phone, the one Daniel had given her, already set up with everything she needed. Slowly, hesitantly, she opened Twitter. The photo of her and the boys holding the sign was still circulating, with thousands of comments, messages of support, people asking if she had been found. Her hands trembled as she typed. To everyone who shared our story, thank you. To Mr. Elon Musk, you changed our lives. My sons will sleep in a real home tonight because of your kindness. I will never forget this. She hesitated before pressing send. Would he see it? Would he even notice? She didn't have to wonder for long. Within minutes, her notifications exploded. Messages of joy, people from around the world celebrating with her. And then a reply. You're welcome. This is just the beginning. The future is bright for you and your boys. Elon Musk. Amina stared at the screen, unable to process it. The most powerful man in the world, the man who had made this possible, had taken the time to respond. Tears welled in her eyes. For the first time in so long, she wasn't just surviving. She was living. The morning light poured into the bedroom, casting warm golden hues across the walls. Amina blinked awake, momentarily disoriented by the soft mattress beneath her and the quiet stillness of the house. No distant explosions. No early morning chaos of the refugee camp. Just the rhythmic breathing of her sons in the next room and the peaceful hum of the world outside. For a long moment, she lay there, allowing herself to soak in the unfamiliar sensation of safety. It had been years since she had woken up without fear gnawing at the edges of her thoughts. Her body was used to rising before dawn, standing in endless lines for food, carrying Sammy on her hip while trying to keep Yusuf and Omar close in the ever-crowded camps. Now there was no rush, no desperation. She turned to her bedside table, where the sleek new phone Daniel had given her rested. The notifications were still coming in. She hesitated before unlocking the screen, scrolling through the messages from strangers, people from around the world who had seen her story, who had prayed for her, who were overjoyed to see that her family had been given another chance. One message stood out. It was from an unknown number. Welcome home, Amina. If you or your boys need anything, you have my direct contact. Her breath hitched. He had sent this personally? She reread it as if trying to make sure it was real. The most powerful man in the world, the man responsible for her new life, had reached out to her. For a long time, she had believed that people like him, billionaires, leaders, men who changed the world, existed in a place far removed from people like her. People who had to fight for the basics: food, shelter, dignity. And yet, here she was, living in a home he had provided, waking up without hunger gnawing at her stomach, watching her children finally sleep without worry. She exhaled, typing out a response carefully. Thank you, Mr. Musk. I still don't know how to believe this is real. My sons and I are safe because of you. We will never forget this kindness. A moment later, a response came. It's real. And it's just the start. Let's talk soon. Amina set the phone down, pressing a hand over her heart. She wasn't sure what he meant by just the start, but something in her gut told her that this was far from the end of her journey. The sound of footsteps padding toward her door made her turn. The boys peeked in, their faces still carrying the remnants of sleep. Sammy, still clutching the stuffed bear he had found the night before, climbed into her lap without a word. Yusuf and Omar hesitated for only a moment before joining, all of them huddling together like they always had, even in the worst of times. Did we dream this, Mama? Omar asked softly. Amina kissed the top of his head. No, Habibi. This is real. Yusuf, who had always carried the quiet wisdom of an eldest child, looked up at her with wide, thoughtful eyes. "What happens now?" Amina smiled, smoothing his dark curls. "Now, we start again." The next few weeks were filled with firsts. The boys were enrolled in school, something they had barely dared to dream of back in the camp. Their first day was a mixture of nerves and excitement, with Amina holding back tears as she watched them step into a world where they had the opportunity to learn, to grow, to have futures that weren't dictated by war and struggle. Her own days were filled with meetings, guidance sessions, and adjustments. Daniel and the team overseeing their transition helped her set up everything: bank accounts, identification, job placements. She insisted on working, not wanting to rely solely on charity, and within a few weeks, she found a part-time position at a local community center, helping other refugee families adjust to their new lives. The first paycheck she received made her cry. It wasn't about the money, it was about dignity. About standing on her own feet again. About proving to herself and her children that they weren't just being given a new life, they were building one. One evening, as she prepared dinner, her phone buzzed again. It was a call, not from an unknown number this time, but from him. Her hands trembled as she answered. "Hello." Amina, Elon Musk's voice was calm, steady. "How are you and the boys adjusting?" She swallowed hard, gripping the counter for support. "We are good. More than good. I don't have the words, Mr. Musk. This life, it's something I never imagined. That's what I wanted to talk about," he said. "I've been thinking about your story. About the millions of other families in your position. You made me realize that the world has the resources to help, but sometimes, all it takes is seeing one face, one story, to make a difference." Amina listened, her heart pounding. "I want to do more," Elon continued. "Not just for you, but for others like you. I want to set up a program, something that gives displaced families a real chance. Jobs, homes, education. A future." She pressed a hand to her chest, overwhelmed. "Mr. Musk, that would change so many lives. I want you to be part of it," he said. "Not just as a recipient, but as a voice. You understand the struggle better than anyone. Would you help me shape this initiative?" Amina's knees felt weak. A few weeks ago, she had been standing in a refugee camp, holding a sign, praying for a miracle. And now, the richest man in the world was asking for her guidance. Tears welled in her eyes. "I would be honored." "Good," Elon said. "Let's change the world together." And just like that, Amina's story, one that had begun in struggle and desperation, became something greater. Not just a story of survival. A story of hope. Amina sat at the dining table, her fingers still curled around the phone long after the call had ended. She couldn't quite process what had just happened. Elon Musk, one of the most powerful men in the world, had asked her to be a part of something bigger, something that could change not just her life but the lives of thousands, maybe even millions, of displaced families across the world. The weight of it settled deep in her chest, not as a burden, but as a responsibility. She had spent so many years just trying to survive, thinking of nothing beyond the next meal, the next night, the next moment she needed to protect her sons. But now she had a chance to build something, to make sure no mother had to live in the kind of fear she had endured. "Mama?" Yusuf's voice pulled her out of her thoughts. She turned to find him standing in the kitchen doorway, his dark eyes filled with curiosity. He had grown up too fast in the camp, forced to take on responsibility beyond his years, and yet there was still something boyish about him now, something lighter that hadn't been there before. Safety had allowed him to be a child again. "Yes, Habibi?" she asked, softening her voice. "Who was that on the phone?" She hesitated, wondering how much he could understand. Then she decided he deserved to know. "It was Mr. Musk. He wants me to help other families like ours." Yusuf's eyes widened. "Help how?" Amina exhaled, running a hand over her scarf. "He wants to start a program, one that helps refugees find homes, jobs, a fresh start. He asked me to be a part of it." Her eldest son's face broke into a wide smile. "That's amazing, Mama." He rushed forward, wrapping his arms around her. "You deserve this." Tears stung her eyes, but she held them back. "We deserve this." Sammy, barely understanding what was happening, toddled over and squeezed himself into the hug. "Mama's gonna be famous," he declared with a giggle. Omar, leaning against the counter, smirked. "Yeah, Mama. Now you'll be as famous as Elon Musk." Amina laughed, shaking her head. "I don't want to be famous. I just want to make sure no one else has to suffer like we did." That night, as she tucked her boys into bed, she sat by the window, staring at the night sky. The stars, once so distant and unreachable, now felt closer somehow, like possibilities waiting to be discovered. Maybe, just maybe, this was her second chance. Not just to live, but to make a difference. The next morning, a black car arrived outside their home. Daniel stepped out, his usual kind smile in place. "Ready for your next adventure?" he asked as Amina stepped onto the porch. She nodded, adjusting her scarf. "More than ready." They drove to a corporate office, sleek and modern, unlike anything she had ever set foot in before. She felt out of place at first, walking through the towering glass doors, but Daniel reassured her. "They want to hear your story," he said. "Your experience matters." Inside, she was introduced to a team of executives, data analysts, and humanitarian experts, people who had spent years working on refugee aid but had never actually lived through it. As they spoke, presenting charts and figures, she listened carefully. They talked about statistics, government policies, relocation processes, but they didn't talk about the human side. The fear, the exhaustion, the hopelessness. When they finally turned to her and asked what she thought, she took a steady breath. "You want to help people?" she said. "That's good. But people aren't numbers on a chart. You can't just give them a home and expect them to be okay. You have to give them dignity." The room fell silent. She continued, her voice growing stronger. "In the camps, we didn't just need food and shelter. We needed to feel like we mattered. We needed work, education, purpose. If you want to help refugees, you can't just save them, you have to give them the tools to stand on their own." Elon Musk, who had been sitting quietly at the head of the table, nodded. "I agree." His sharp blue eyes focused on her. "Tell me, what would you do differently?" Amina swallowed, her hands tightening in her lap. She had never imagined sitting in a room like this, surrounded by some of the most influential minds in the world, being asked for her opinion. But she wasn't afraid. "Not anymore. I would start with job placement," she said. "Many refugees are highly skilled, but their qualifications don't transfer to new countries. We need programs to help them integrate, to match them with work that fits their skills. That way, they can rebuild their lives, not just survive." Elon nodded. "Go on." "Education," she continued. "Not just for children, but for adults too. Language barriers hold people back. If they don't speak the language of their new home, they can't find work. And lastly," she hesitated but then said it, "mental health support. People who escape war, they carry the war with them. We need to help them heal." For the first time since the meeting had started, the room wasn't filled with corporate language and technical jargon. It was filled with understanding. Elon leaned back, his fingers tapping against the table. "That's exactly what we need." The meeting continued, plans unfolding, strategies being developed. Amina found herself contributing ideas, working alongside experts as an equal. She wasn't just a woman who had needed help, she was now someone who could help others. As the hours passed, Elon pulled her aside. "You're good at this," he told her. "You understand what these families need better than anyone." Amina shook her head modestly. "I just know what it's like to be on the other side. That's what makes you valuable," he said. "I want you involved in this long term. Not just as an advisor, but as a leader." Her heart pounded. "Mr. Musk, I don't know if I'm qualified for that." He smiled. "You're more qualified than any of us." She exhaled, trying to process everything. "If this means helping others like me, like my boys, then yes. I'll do it." He extended his hand. She shook it, sealing not just a job offer, but a mission. When she returned home that evening, the boys ran to greet her. They bombarded her with questions, excited to hear about her meeting with the Rocket Man. She laughed, sitting them down and telling them what she could. "But does this mean you're going to be working now, Mama?" Yusuf asked. "Yes," she said, pulling them close. "But not just for us. For families all over the world." Sammy yawned, curling up against her. Does that mean you'll make sure all kids have beds like ours? Amina smiled, stroking his hair. Inshallah, Habibi. That's exactly what I'm going to try to do. That night, as she lay in bed, she thought about how much her life had changed in such a short time. From a forgotten refugee to a voice for thousands. From a woman begging for help to a woman shaping the future. As she closed her eyes, she knew one thing for certain. This wasn't just the start of her new life. This was the start of something bigger than herself. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind. Amina found herself navigating a world she had never imagined. A world of high-stakes meetings, international discussions, and strategic planning sessions with some of the most influential people on the planet. But unlike the executives and politicians she sat across from, she was not there as a guest or a symbolic figure. She was there because she knew what it meant to be a refugee, to be invisible, to fight for survival every day while the rest of the world moved on. Every morning, she kissed her sons goodbye before heading to her office in a sleek glass building, something that still felt surreal. Just a few months ago, she had woken up in a crowded refugee camp, surrounded by dust and despair. Now, she was waking up in a home that had been given to her by one of the wealthiest men in the world, stepping into meetings where her opinions actually mattered. The initiative Elon Musk had envisioned was already taking shape. The Refugee Employment Initiative, that was the name they had settled on, though Elon insisted that they call it something more personal. He wanted it to reflect not just an effort, but a movement. One afternoon, as she was reviewing documents with Daniel and the team, a knock at the conference room door interrupted them. A tall, blonde woman in a business suit stepped inside, carrying a folder. "Elon wants to see Amina," she said with a polite but firm smile. Amina exchanged a glance with Daniel before nodding. She followed the woman down the hall, her heart pounding slightly. She had spoken to Musk several times now, but she still wasn't used to being summoned so directly. When she entered his office, he was staring at a whiteboard covered in notes, sketches, and figures. He turned, his familiar sharp gaze locking onto hers. "Amina," he said, gesturing for her to sit. "I wanted to run something by you." She took a seat across from him, folding her hands in her lap. "Of course." Elon leaned forward. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said in that first meeting, about how refugees don't just need a home. They need work, purpose." He tapped the whiteboard behind him. "I want to take this beyond charity. I don't want to just hand out homes and food. I want to give people a way to build their own futures." She nodded. "That's exactly what they need. I want to start by hiring refugees within my own companies," Elon continued. "Not just entry-level positions, but real, skilled jobs, engineers, technicians, designers. People who have the skills but never had the opportunities." Amina felt a wave of emotion wash over her. This was exactly what she had dreamed of, giving people dignity instead of just aid. That would change everything. He smiled slightly. "That's the idea." The next few weeks were a flurry of planning, connecting with organizations that worked on job placement for displaced individuals, and identifying real opportunities where talented refugees could be placed into meaningful careers. Amina worked tirelessly, speaking with companies, reviewing policies, ensuring that the program wasn't just a publicity stunt but something that would have lasting impact. Then came the moment that truly solidified the movement. Elon Musk had invited Amina to join him at a major press conference. It was the kind of event that would be broadcast worldwide, covered by every major news outlet. At first, she hesitated. She had never wanted fame, only change. But Elon insisted. "The world needs to see the people behind this," he told her. "They need to see you." So she agreed. The morning of the event, she stood backstage, her heart pounding. She had spoken in meetings, she had shared her story with influential people, but this was different. The whole world would be watching. She felt a hand on her shoulder. She turned to see Daniel standing beside her. "You're going to do great," he assured her. She exhaled, steadying herself. "I hope so." Moments later, she followed Elon onto the stage. The cameras flashed, the murmurs in the audience quieting as he approached the podium. "Good morning," he began, his voice steady and commanding. "We are here today because the world has a problem. one that is solvable, but one that requires action. There are millions of displaced people around the world. Millions of people who are not just statistics, not just numbers on a report. They are human beings. Engineers, doctors, teachers, parents. He paused, scanning the room. For too long, we have looked at refugees as a problem to be managed. I say we look at them as an untapped resource, people who are ready to contribute, ready to work, ready to build. And that is why I am announcing the launch of the Refugee Employment Initiative. The room erupted in flashes from the cameras. Journalists whispered among themselves, quickly typing away on their laptops. Elon gestured toward Amina. This initiative would not exist without the voice of someone who has lived this reality. Someone who understands, better than any of us, what needs to be done. Amina, will you join me? She took a deep breath and stepped forward. The silence in the room was deafening as she looked out at the sea of faces. She saw skepticism, curiosity, but also something else, hope. My name is Amina, she began, her voice steady. Not long ago, I was living in a refugee camp with my 3 sons. Every day, I stood in food lines, wondering if we would have enough to eat. Every night, I lay awake, wondering if my children would have a future. She paused, gripping the edges of the podium. And then, something incredible happened. Someone saw me. Someone gave me a chance. And now, I am here, standing before you, not as a refugee, but as a mother, as a woman with a purpose, as a person who wants to help others find the same hope that I found. She looked directly into the cameras. Refugees are not helpless. We are not burdens. We are people. We are survivors. And we are ready to work, to build, to contribute. We don't want pity. We want opportunity. The room was silent. Then, one by one, people began to clap. The sound grew louder, a wave of applause rippling through the audience. Reporters scrambled to take notes, to record every word. Elon nodded beside her, satisfaction in his expression. He leaned into the microphone. And that's why we're starting today. We are officially opening applications for displaced individuals around the world to join Tesla, SpaceX, Neuralink, and other partner companies. We will hire, we will train, and we will change lives. The clapping turned into cheers. As Amina stepped back from the podium, she felt a tear slip down her cheek. Not from sadness, but from relief. From knowing that she had done something that mattered. That night, as she tucked her boys into bed, Yusuf smiled up at her. "Mama, are you going to be famous now?" She chuckled, stroking his hair. "I don't care about that, Habibi," Omar grinned. "But you're going to help a lot of people, right?" She nodded. "Yes. And that's all that matters." Sammy, already half asleep, mumbled, "Elon Musk is like a superhero." Amina laughed softly. "Maybe he is." But as she lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, she realized something. She had once prayed for a miracle. But now, she was the miracle for others. And this was only the beginning. Amina woke up to a new reality, one where she wasn't just another displaced woman trying to survive, but a leader, a voice for thousands. The morning air was crisp as she stepped outside onto the porch of the house that had once felt like a dream but now was home. The weight of what had happened at the press conference the day before still sat heavy in her chest, not as fear but as purpose. The world had seen her. They had listened. Now, she had to make sure that her words weren't just headlines. They had to become action. Her phone buzzed on the table, notifications still pouring in from across the globe. People from war-torn countries, families living in refugee camps, struggling workers, all of them reaching out, all of them hoping for the same miracle she had received. "How do I apply? Please, can you help my family? I have been waiting in a camp for 6 years. I just want to work." Each message was a reminder of what she had to do next. Daniel arrived at her house later that morning, stepping inside with a laptop tucked under his arm. His usual calm demeanor was mixed with excitement as he set it down in front of her. "We've had over 1 million applications in the first 24 hours, he said. Amina nearly dropped the cup of tea in her hands. 1 million. He nodded. "And growing. This is bigger than we anticipated." She exhaled sharply, trying to process the scale of it. 1 million people, all of them desperate for a chance, just like she had been. Elon wants to meet again, Daniel continued. He's bringing in his hiring teams. They need a system to sort through the applicants, to find the ones who are ready to work, who have the skills, who just need the opportunity. Amina nodded. Then we need to make sure this is done right. Not just names on a list. These are real people. That afternoon, she found herself back in the sleek conference room at Tesla headquarters. Elon Musk sat at the head of the table, his expression sharp and focused as he flipped through pages of reports. Around him, executives and team leaders from his various companies were engaged in discussions about logistics, hiring processes, and partnerships with governments. We need to cut through the bureaucracy, Elon said. I don't want this to be some drawn-out, multi-year project. We need people working now. Amina leaned forward. The problem isn't just jobs, Mr. Musk. Many of these people don't have the documents they need. Their degrees, their work experience, some of it was lost when they fled their countries. If we rely on traditional hiring processes, many of them won't qualify on paper. Elon tapped his pen against the table. So we don't do it the traditional way. What's your solution? She took a deep breath. We create skills-based hiring programs. We assess what they can do, not just what's written on a piece of paper. Many refugees are engineers, doctors, craftsmen, teachers. We test their abilities directly. And for those who need extra training, we provide it. One of the HR directors raised an eyebrow. That would require a major shift in the way we hire. Elon cut in. Then we shift. Silence fell across the room. Amina glanced at him, reading the determination in his eyes. He wasn't just doing this as a public relations move. He meant it. We'll build training centers, Elon continued. Fast-track employment. Offer mentorship programs with experienced employees. We'll fund the transition, cover housing and basic needs for the first 6 months to ensure they can stand on their own. Amina's heart pounded. This was really happening. The next few weeks moved at lightning speed. Tesla, SpaceX, Neuralink, and several partner companies all began implementing the new hiring model. Skills assessment programs were designed, training modules created, legal teams worked around the clock to streamline visa processes for refugees. Amina found herself in meetings with government officials, negotiating pathways to legal employment for displaced individuals. She spoke with refugee organizations, ensuring that families who had been ignored for years now had a direct route to opportunity. Then, the first group of hires arrived. They came from all over the world: Syria, Afghanistan, Venezuela, Sudan, Ukraine, people who had lost everything but still held on to the hope that they could rebuild. Amina stood at the entrance of Tesla's training facility, watching as buses pulled up. The men and women stepping off carried bags with all they had left in the world. Some clutched their children's hands. Others simply looked around in awe. One man, dressed in a worn suit that had clearly been patched several times, stepped forward hesitantly. Amina, he asked, his accent thick but his words careful. She smiled warmly. Yes. Welcome. The man's eyes filled with tears. I saw your story. He swallowed hard. I was an electrical engineer before the war. I thought I would never work again. Amina reached out, squeezing his hand. You will work again. The training programs launched successfully, placing hundreds of people in paid apprenticeships that would transition into full-time jobs. The numbers kept growing. What started with hundreds quickly became thousands. Then came the moment that shook the world. Elon Musk announced on Twitter, over 10,000 refugees hired across our companies. The goal is 100,000 by next year. We don't just talk about solutions. We create them. The post went viral instantly. News outlets picked up the story. Interviews were scheduled. Companies outside of Tesla began reaching out, wanting to join the initiative. One night, as Amina sat on her porch, reflecting on how drastically her life had changed, her phone rang. She smiled as she saw the name. Elon, she answered. Amina, he said, his tone casual but purposeful. We need to go bigger. She laughed softly. Bigger? We've already changed thousands of lives. Not enough, he replied. We need a global movement. More companies. More industries. More governments on board. I want this to be something that lasts beyond us. Amina's breath caught. Beyond us. She had once stood in the dirt of a refugee camp, holding a cardboard sign, begging for help. Now, she was about to help change the world. And for the first time, she truly believed anything was possible.